And thank everyone for coming today. My name is Paul Novotny. I am the House Public Safety Chair. And I'm proud to stand here with my colleagues, most of which are on the Public Safety Committee. Some are former Public Safety Committees, and some have bills that are involved that have been associated with our number one bill that we have submitted. During my last 5 years in the House, I have witnessed the devastating consequences of soft on crime policies. These policies have tied the hands of law enforcement, emboldened criminals, and have made our communities less safe. Today, we are here to say enough is enough. Our plan is built on three key pillars: helping law enforcement keep our communities safe, keeping violent and dangerous offenders off the streets, and holding the criminal justice system accountable. Our proposals include 13 targeted provisions designed to achieve these goals. Many of these proposals have been introduced in previous years, but the House DFL has refused to give them hearings. Many have been the request of our law enforcement partners. Others have come in response to heart-wrenching stories we continue to see on the news of violent criminals reoffending after an early release from incarceration. That early release, if there was any incarceration, deprives the offender of the chance to get the help they need to stop reoffending. Finally, there are some provisions in this proposal that have come from the frustration we have heard from constituents about the charging and sentencing practices of the criminal justice system. Let me highlight just a few of them. We are proposing a mandatory minimum of 10-year prison sentence for predators involved in first-degree sex trafficking. We propose that the offenders engaged in criminal sexual conduct who receive stayed sentences from the courts should still be required to register as sexual offenders. We're proposing new and enhanced criminal offenses to address the dangerous behaviors of blocking freeways, transit routes, of fleeing police in a reckless manner, and conspiring to damage critical infrastructure like pipelines and water lines. We're proposing enhanced criminal penalties for the assault of a peace officer, taking that from a gross misdemeanor to a felony. We are also introducing measures to ensure greater transparency in the criminal justice system. We want to have searchable websites for the public so they can find out more information on charging decisions by judges and prosecutors. We also want to require the disclosure of individuals or organizations that pay bail for offenders. And finally, we want to require legislative approval for sentencing changes proposed by the Sentencing Guideline Commission. Let me be clear. This plan is about putting victims and their families first. It's about giving law enforcement the resources they need to keep their community safe. And it's about restoring accountability to a system that often fails the people it's meant to protect. The safety of our community should not be a partisan issue. It's a fundamental obligation. We invite our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to show up for work, join us in supporting these common sense proposals that will make Minnesota a safer place to live, work, and raise a family. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Representative, you're from law enforcement. I see several former law enforcement officers here. Can you talk about that perspective and what you're hearing from your colleagues about what they need out there on the streets?
I haven't sat down. I should probably do this at some point and figure out how many years of law enforcement that we have standing just in this room. And not only are some of us retired law enforcement, we've got active law enforcement in the room also. Keep that in mind. It's probably one of the things that draws such a large amount of us to the legislature because we see what works and doesn't work, and we see the consequences of bad decisions.
Does your package address staffing? You know, that's obviously been an ongoing problem for the last, 5 years or so.
Staffing is under budget issues. These are what we consider to be our top priority bills. Obviously, we have many other bills that will make a difference and we want to bring forward. Most of these bills were the ones, as I said before, were focused on bills that we couldn't get hearings from in the past.
When this first dropped, I believe it was House File 7, obviously that's not up anymore. Is it still your plan to introduce it as one large package, or will you be introducing separate bills?
This is what was considered House File 007. We, as you may know, we did hear that on the one public safety committee hearing that we were able to have. And yes, we will resubmit this because it is our top priority. And for the reasons I previously stated, it's very important and it's a building block on what we hope to get done this year to make Minnesota safer.
Have you reached out to the other side of the aisle? I know they're not here, but the Senate, the other side of the aisle, what's the status?
The Senate, we've been over to the Senate working with them. Obviously, we have good partners over there, the Public Safety Judiciary Committee over there. Conversations with our members from across the aisle, no.
Not at all.
We had meetings previous to session, but since they have not showed up, there's been no conversations.
Considering the Senate and the power sharing that they were under, it won't be for long, but do you think there's more bipartisan interest in these types of proposals than there was under the trifecta?
We would hope. I've pointed to what happened last year in the two bills that came out, as the one policy bill that came out last year. That was all green. We all agreed to that. That was a bipartisan bill. There was a little bit of dissension on the budget bill that came out, and some of that was rightfully so, but, as compared to the year before that, where there were numerous, what I feel were anti-law enforcement and anti-public safety bills. And those have, for the most part, proven to be based in true suspicions.
Do you sense a tide in the public and in the legislature going more towards supporting law enforcement versus, the racial reckoning that happened and started here?
I can only hope that the pendulum is swinging to change the focus to victims and their families and promoting the thought that we want to eliminate further victims.
When it comes to the prosecutor transparency, what have your conversations been like with prosecutors? I know each county, you're gonna get a different answer, but what have some of them told you about what that might mean?
We met with a representative of the County Attorneys Association, and, nothing that we're asking for in information is new. The information that we're asking for is just that it be publicly searchable. If you have the knowledge, as the people in this room, as a reporter, you've got the knowledge and the ability to send someone to a courthouse to get access to the records, well, we think the public should have that same right. And, if you're from a different area, if you are a domestic abuse victim that has fled to a different part of the state, you should be able to still know what's going on and check these records. And that's just one of the components. Everything else in the government is shifting towards transparency. We've got the ability to now, with these searchable databases, that they should be available to everyone.
Did you have a fiscal note on this bill?
We've requested it.
Okay.
It's a big bill, and I don't think it's showed up yet, no.
Do you have a sense of big price tag? I mean, is this gonna require new money?
I don't think so. The minimum requirements on some of the, the mandatory minimum on the sex trafficking, obviously there'd be an increase in bed cost, but it's not a real big number of offenders that we'd be housing.
And did you hear the governor's office yesterday saying that the White House was freezing law enforcement funding? What do you know about that and have to say about it?
I had to laugh because just last week, the governor's budget came out and cut $6 million from our training budget alone. He didn't cut, the federal thing didn't cut any spending, it just froze it until it could be researched and proved that it's right.
Law enforcement, have you been able to track down some of the freeze and how it might affect law enforcement in Minnesota?
I don't know, it's, obviously I read the press, I see that,
Yeah, it was rescinded like
Yeah.
10 minutes ago.
Probably isn't.
The funding freeze.
one
is
at a
happening.
time.
It was rescinded. The
There-
White House rescinded the freeze order about an hour ago, so.
Well, okay, so I've been obviously studying for this before we came. But it's, look,
But there's a big public reaction to there with it.
you're upsetting the cart. We've got a lot of money, as we've seen in the other issues that are coming on in the state with fraud. Yeah, there are people that will be upset that if you're doing something wrong. And I'll use the analogy that I like to use. If you have a position that you can't defend, your only action that you can take is to attack, so.
Can you share more about the database? Do you envision it to be an extension of MCRO or something separate than that?
I think for privacy and to make sure that information that is not, that is not public doesn't accidentally find their way, I think they should be firewalled, have a separate, I don't think this should be an add-on, I think it should be a separate database.
Do you anticipate it costing, if it is a separate database with the, separate search function, all of that, just to stand that up, wouldn't it cost a significant amount of money to create all of that and the labor to input the data? Does your bill contemplate that at all?
We had tentative discussions when we were talking about this bill in the past, this particular provisions of the bill in the past, and somebody from IT, I believe it was about the $500,000 to stand the system up and then maintain it.
Okay, so you're saying in previous hearings on this, I know this has come up
We
before.
haven't had previous hearings, we couldn't get a hearing before, we had discussions with IT, like I said, none of this information's new. It's already collected, it's already put together, we just want it searchable. When you talk about the sentencing from a judge or a departure, a report goes to the Sentencing Guidelines Commission, and then it gets filed. There's no reason why that can't be automated, so that the courts could submit that information electronically, and then it goes to the database, so we know which judges are doing downward departures. You should be able to look that up and why.
If the House is tied, do you think you can get a hearing on this in March or whenever?
If they ever come back, and if we do go back to a tie, the agreement was that we'd have alternating days.
Are you still teaching, police training?
I am not anymore, no.
Did you before?
I was a law enforcement trainer, I did use of force, firearms, everything else
I
for
just wondered if you
probably
heard
20 years.
Whether there's been any recovery in the applications to those programs, meaning the start of the pipeline, do you think that's recovering since it suffered?
Yeah, there has been a recovery, the numbers are coming up. We've got different programs and different avenues for people coming in. The community college system and the state college system the numbers are up a little bit. They will not be enough to cover the shortfall that we know is coming with retirements.
That doesn't count the bigger department's own programs, where they have their cadets, that's a separate from the.
Yes, I've seen where Minneapolis PD, for example, will be, make a public announcement about having 25 or 30 people join their academy. How many make it out the academy? They won't even cover the people that retire in the month that they graduate.
You talked about some mandatory minimums for some criminal penalties for certain crimes. I know this is kind of tangentially related, but the governor had proposed increasing the penalty for people who steal from public programs by 20%. I don't know what that actually means in terms of years on that statute as it exists today, but is that something that Republicans would support, putting these people behind bars for longer than the law would allow today?
We have several bills that are, if they're not already ready to be dropped, that they're in the pipeline to be ready to address public theft funds. I haven't read the governor's specific proposal, but, that's obviously something that's very important, and it's affecting all of us. All taxpayers in Minnesota demand a better answer. They need to know that when they're giving their hard-earned taxes to the state, that they're well used.
How do you feel about public safety in the state capitol? I think we're kind of unusual across the country that we don't have metal detectors, we don't have, we've left the building very open, and it's a tense time on both sides of the aisle. How do you feel about that?
Well, Mayor, there's a lot of things, and that's a whole different subject we could go
It's
into.
public safety, right?
It
And
is
your
public
safety and all
safety,
of our
well,
safety
actually,
here,
the
right?
Capitol Security is handled by a different committee. We don't do that. As a law enforcement officer with law enforcement officers behind me, we have our opinions about things, and, we're here to talk about House File 7 and our priorities in the legislature going forward. I will say that there have been, after last week's thing, there have been some suggestions for improvements, and we hope to make it safe for everyone to be here.
Do you carry at the Capitol? Do you know if members?
Next
in your
question.
office do? No?
I think we have time for one more question.
When you guys say that the communities are less safe, now how do you define that? If you actually look at statistics of violent crime, property crime, it's lower in Minnesota now than it's been in 40, 50 years.
Well, I'd really dispute that number, that it's 40 or 50 years, and my answer to you is, actually, it's more of a question. My question to you is, how much crime are you willing to tolerate? Okay? Crime will raise to the point that it is tolerated, and if we tolerate it in the state, I get sickened when I hear certain cities with large, tall buildings get excited about the fact that they might have had a 20% reduction in their murder rate. If you go from 80 murders to 60 murders, that's still 60 murders. None of it should be tolerated. It wouldn't be tolerated in Woodbury, it wouldn't be tolerated in Minnetonka, it wouldn't be tolerated in Timbuktu. It shouldn't be tolerated. If you wouldn't want it for your neighborhood, if you wouldn't want your kid living there being exposed to that, then you shouldn't tolerate it for anyone else. And that's, we as a Minnesota Republican Public Safety Committee, we stand for everyone. We want everyone to feel safe. We want everyone to be able to know their kids go to school and can walk home from the bus without being assaulted or offered drugs or kidnapped or caught by a stray round. Everyone should expect the same treatment, no matter where you live.
Can you guys describe maybe the work that you're doing now that you're kind of resetting after the Supreme Court decision? You mentioned you had a hearing on this bill, but now that you can't have committees, I'm wondering how you guys are taking that work on your bills outside of that space. Are you meeting with certain people? What does that look like for the House Republicans?
It's actually freed up time to meet with groups and do a deeper dive into budgets. There's gonna be budget cuts. We've got the deficit looming. As I said before, then the governor's budget cutting $6 million from post-funding, mandated funding, that's now become an unfunded mandate. And now, depending on, you're running about $800 to $900 per officer in this state. So if you're a small department that is strapped for a budget, you've now got an unfunded mandate that's coming up. They still have to do that training. We're discussing how we're going to make that budget work. Obviously, we're gonna have to look at rearranging some money in the budget going forward. So that's where our discussions are. We've got some plans to go out. Myself and other members of the committee have been out to some of our prisons, talking to correctional officers. We intend to continue that up. That's a major component and I think it is the biggest part of our budget, corrections. The correctional officer safety is important too. We want to make sure that they've got the resources they need so that they can be safe and provide a situation so that these people that are in custody are able to be reformed.
You have a provision in there on increasing penalties for assault of police officers, so you had to know we were gonna ask this question. As a police officer, what are your thoughts about the pardons of January 6 defendants, some of whom were convicted of assaulting police officers?
I have purposely not got involved in that because I haven't had the time to look through all the videos. Back at the state level and the things that I can control is, I know that assaults on police officers are up greatly. We lost 5 public safety officers or peace officers in about a year and a half here. It's tragic. The only thing that I would think about adding the protection for public safety officers is that we look at expanding that into corrections and EMS too.
Any of the other current or former police officers want to take a swing at that question? Okay.
All right, thank you.